wanted to at least start out by thanking you, and then also by asking you in the thought process of all these this epidemic of toxic emotions. It seems like more than ever between COVID and now racism being exposed as it has, that more than ever, I'm sure you're doing a lot of talks about this, but more than ever, there's toxic emotions and toxic thoughts. When somebody can finally see that they have toxic racism in their own thoughts, how would you say they can get rid of that?
Okay, so maybe a good play. That's such an excellent question. And yes, I'm talking about that all the time. It's in everyone's conversations at the moment as well. And I think that there's so many, well, first of all, thanks to Peter and Kevin, both of you. It's an honor to be here. And thank you for having this conversation, because it's so necessary. And I think it's a conversation that will bring a lot of hope to people, because everyone's feeling terribly confused by, first of all, COVID and now what's happening with the racism. So there's a lot of positive. First of all, thank goodness people are becoming more aware. Yeah. So because awareness is the first step in any change. And we've had periods through history, as we know, of people becoming aware that racism is just not acceptable. But it's been like a pressure cooker. And I think we've reached a point in history where it's almost like we were prepared through the COVID pandemic and quarantine, which is still going on to a certain extent, that we've changed how we are looking at life. Because, to quote an epidemiologist that I interviewed recently, he said that for the first time in human history, humans collectively across the globe are facing the same enemy. It's the first time in history, so it's very profound, because COVID isn't selective.
Right.
Everyone's vulnerable, and it's collectively as humanity we've come together to solve this problem. And it's the first time that we're not fighting different enemies, we're fighting the same enemy. It's a very unique period in history that can be leveraged in the right way, and it's made everyone very I think the reaction that we're seeing with racism is actually it's so important people to do it, but the high level of emotions is actually very positive, because it finally means that people have got into a deep thinking space during the quarantine, because it's changed how people are thinking. It's forced us to think differently. And we're starting to think about the right things. We're not getting so distractible. We're not allowing ourselves to get caught up in the busyness of life. And for an issue like George Floyd or that Cooper in the park in New York, we can't just have those incidents come up and say, oh, this is terrible, I'll pray, we need more praise, and then everyone carries on with life as usual.
Yeah.
COVID has changed life as usual, and then we have to look back at what was life as usual in the first place, and was it so normal? And the comments that people have made that, we just want to get back to how we were. You never can go back in the past. You never are the same. We are changing. Your brain is neuroplastic. It merges with the environments, and you drive the neuroplasticity with your mind. So every experience that you have as a human is going to change how your brain is functioning, and is going to change your output. Because as we know from the scriptures, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Yeah. And science and spirituality are one and the same thing. They're just looking at the same thing from two different angles. The science is the how-to, and the spirituality, the sort of the Bible and teachings and so on, are more the sort of story of it. And then you've got the how-to, and you've got to put the two together. And that's why science is so profoundly important in helping us navigate through something like COVID-19 and navigate into what we are now seeing. And this is going to be a pattern for the future. We are going to find that collectively as humans, we are banding together to fight things that are wrong. And we've almost been trained in the 9 weeks or 12 weeks of COVID. This is my opinion. And from the brain science, we've been trained to think differently. And it's so good, because yes, there's been fear, and we can talk about all those things and increase in depression and everything. But the negativity surrounding that doesn't have to be quite as negative. We can actually look at this thing very differently. And the way I believe we should look at it is that we have changed our depth of processing. In being stuck in your home for such a long period of time with the same people, limiting everything that you normally did, and we wonder how normal it all was anyway, it's changed and brought us back to what we're designed to do as humans, and that is think deeply about life. We're deeply reflective. We are incredibly profound. We're incredibly brilliant. Our brains need constant challenge. Our brains need constant building. And when we live lives that we've been living in the modern era, with the advances in technology, we've become very distractible, and we've become very busy, and we've got caught up in hurry sickness. And I am not anti-technology. I mean, thank God we've got technology. Look, we can communicate like this.
Yeah.
But it's not so much the technology. It's how we in the modern era have managed technology, how we've managed medicine, how we've managed our humanity, how we've managed everything has become very fast and quick fix. Fast, quick fix. Even in the churches, everything's fast, quick fix. We've got to get away from that. And COVID-19 has forced us to change how we process things, think more deeply about things. We're not allowed, we've stopped the surface thinking to a certain extent, and we've started thinking very deeply. And that, I believe, has led to this very deep reaction that we really do need finally with racism. Now, I grew up in South Africa, and I was born in Zimbabwe, and I worked for 25 years in the apartheid and transition and post-apartheid era. And I worked in schools and community centers, and my work was with educating and helping people with mental health. And I saw firsthand for 25 years, 3 days a week, the effects of racism. And I grew up in the apartheid era where racism was, as we know, legalized. I had my second child. I was carrying my second child, just given birth to my second child, and I was voting for Mandela. And so I saw the transition, and I worked in that time. So it doesn't make me an expert. What it does is it makes me someone who has lived and seen the effects of racism. So I grew up white privileged. I grew up with a white skin. So all those, and in a wealthy home, and I had every advantage. And I grew up in an era where there was black toilets and white toilets, and black beaches and white beaches, and black buses. Horrific. That was what I grew up with. And that's what I fought against and I saw the effects of that. And I came to this country thinking, I'm coming to a land of the free, and I see it's here, just it hasn't been quite as formalized and legalized as it was in South Africa, but it's here, it's across the globe. It has changed to a certain extent, but it actually hasn't changed at all. It's just been wrapped in a different box. And so what I see happening now is, because we've changed our thinking during COVID, because we've become more reflective as humans, because we've actually banded together collectively to start fighting a common enemy, and it's been done pretty well by scientists and pretty badly by politicians, in my opinion. Scientists have been the adults in the house, politicians have been fighting, and even church leaders have been a bit problematic in certain churches as well. I did I don't know if you saw, I did an interview with T.D. Jakes the other day. He sent it out to all the churches, a video with myself and Chris Kane and Carl Lenz and Judah Smith and Ron Carpenter and Bishop Jakes, and we were talking about the current situation and how to, racism and so on. And so we were discussing some of these elements, but the point here is that we saw through COVID that a change in thinking, a mismanagement to a certain extent, and also good management to a certain extent. But it's rocked our world. It's changed how we do things. That's great. So they carry over into it's like set the perfect stage. We finally, I believe, are in an era where we can start changing racism, because it is really that kind of situation where people shouting all lives matter, and why are we saying black lives matter, and everyone's got the same color blood, and the church has been the worst. I've had the worst attacks from the church in this last 2 weeks, because you've seen on my posts, we've been very active because of how I grew up. I mean, this is wrong. I've got 2 black son-in-laws, and they could have been George Floyd. So I'm passionate about our whole family, our whole organization. This has got to stop, because it's wrong. And we will do whatever we can on our platform to help this. But we've had the worst kickback from people in the church.
Really?
And it's the worst and the most aggressive, the most nasty, the most bitter. In fact, I think, wow, what God are you worshiping? God is a God of love. And I have seen so much love. Yeah. So, it's kind of been a shock and an eye-opener. And the collective complaint from those people that have been so aggressive has been, all lives matter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that all lives don't matter, but I like to use the analogy that my one son-in-law Jay used, where he said that it's an emergency room. You go to an emergency room, everyone's sick. Everyone needs a doctor. You've got a broken arm, you've got someone with this, you've got someone with that. Everyone's important. Every life matters, and everyone has to wait, and it's triage. So the most urgent are seen first. And in the midst of going through the patients, the doctors are going through them, there's an emergency and an ambulance pulls up to the emergency room, and out comes someone on a stretcher, bleeding, cut up, being shot or whatever, and obviously everyone rushes out to the front. All the nurses and doctors, they rush to the back, and all the attention is on that person, and so it should be, because if you don't, they will die. That is why we say Black Lives Matter. That is why we have to say, because it's not that everyone else doesn't, but we will get to all of them. It's that the emergency is that person bleeding. So we now have to have a deep, insightful reflection and a real getting around the table to change our mindsets around focusing on how do we help that person. What are all the surgeries and medications and things that we need to help that person survive? And that's the message that I'm trying to convey in terms of the Black Lives Matter, in terms of racism. And this is something that we can change.
Yeah.
And so you ask, and that's a long answer to set the stage, and I can go into the how to, but Peter, I can see you want to ask me something.
Yeah, Dr. Luke, that is brilliant. And I agree with you. I've been telling people the context of Black Lives Matter, that in itself is misunderstood. It was said in response to something, not just out of the blue. So when people say Black Lives Matter, it implies to also, not just this is what it is. I think a lot of people have had just many different emotions, a lot of anxiety and stress, and people are they're on Facebook talking about how stressful Facebook is, and so brilliant. But what would you say to the person who has maybe experienced a lot of stress and anxiety in this moment with everything going on, and how do they get back to a place of peace, or how do they enter the position or the presence of peace for the first time? What would you say?
Okay, beautiful question. Excellent and so relevant. So first of all, you're going to be quite surprised at my answer. Anxiety and depression and stress and everything in this time is very good for us. We have become very comfortable with suppressing and pushing everything down. And as humans, we are not designed to push things down. We are designed to grow, not be complacent, not get caught up in the busyness, not get caught up in the niceties and pretend ugly things don't happen. We have become excellent in this current modern era at pushing things down. Drug the depression, pray, pass the buck prayer. I call it, and with all respect to prayer, I believe totally in prayer, but I'll pray for you and then I've done my bit. That's not good enough. As TD Joke said the other day, the time for prayer is actually means action. Real prayer is action, and it's a continual thing. And I can talk more a little bit about that as well. But in terms of anxiety, depression, the stress that everyone's feeling, I am really glad that you're feeling it. Okay, so before you think, oh wow, you think let me explain why I'm saying that. Anxiety, stress, depression, frustration, anger, all the emotions we're experiencing are warning signals that something is wrong. So the way we have been structured is that we are designed to respond to what's wrong. Now, God is love. We know that. Love in quantum physics is a brilliant way, the most accurate and fundamental of sciences of understanding the concept of love. We wouldn't be alive if God wasn't looking. So the energy for life comes from God. We are uniquely able to think and feel and choose, and that generates energy. So as humans, we are thinking, feeling, choosing beings. We're generating this energy. We're connected to the source of thinking, feeling, and choosing, but we have free will. So how we think, feel, and choose is very much up to us, which is why we have to renew our minds and capture our thoughts. So when we don't renew our minds, when we don't capture our thoughts, when we don't align with love, we build toxicity. Then that creates like a bubble of toxic energy. And our non-conscious mind is the spiritual part of us. It's the biggest part of us. And these bubbles of toxic energy form in the brain, and they in the mind, and then in the brain they have a physical structure. And I'm going to use my toxic tree to show that our thoughts are real things. They occupy mental real estate, like a house occupies physical real estate. Thoughts are real things. So as we think and feel and choose, which is mind action, which is energy, which is this brilliant thing that God has given us that we're able to do, we build structures out of what we think, feel, and choose. We build thoughts. Thoughts are like trees. They look like trees in the brain. So in the brain, we store these thoughts like trees. They look like trees made of proteins and chemicals. So they literally have an arbor-like structure. We're designed to build healthy thoughts, We're not designed to build toxic thoughts. But because we have free will, we build toxic thoughts. We make wrong choices. We react. We have toxic mindsets. We grow up in environments where there's racism. We grow up in environments where we're judging others because it's different. We use differences. We've become a society and a world where difference is seen as a value judgment, which is a terrible thing, because difference is something God created and difference is something to be celebrated. So what God has built into us, which I think is phenomenal, is the ability to make wrong choices and then the ability to feel the wrong choices that we've made. So this now would be a wrong choice. So let's take the current context of racism. For someone like that, I think it was Amy Cooper, to immediately assume that that is a black person, and knowing in her mind that she could call a policeman and that guy potentially, he could have been murdered. He could have been shot. She knew that. Because she's grown up in that society. She knew she could manipulate her whiteness to turn the situation around. She knew that if she cried the tears, she could use that feminism thing to manipulate the situation even more. That is just to think like that. If it had been a white guy or a white woman, she wouldn't have done that. So that's toxic. So that is a toxic thought. And that is a pattern that's come through from not just that moment. That wasn't just a reactive response that she just had in the moment. That policeman standing on George Floyd's neck, that wasn't just a reaction in the moment. That has come from years of wrong thinking. Because everything you do is not some random reaction, some ethereal. It is a real physical thought that you have built. There is a root. Every action has a root. That root is a thought. A thought is a massive concept. And within every thought, as you can see all the branches here, there are lots of memories. So a thought is a tree that contains memories. Memories contain information. The thinking that led up to that policeman standing on George Floyd's neck, Chauvin or whatever his name is, that thinking that led up to Cooper saying what she did, that's all little combinations of things over the years that have built into building this big thoughts and emotions. And that then leads to an action. And that action reinforces unless changed. So that toxic thought is real. It occupies mental real estate, but it is the result of thinking, feeling, and choosing. So if we take Chauvin, how do I say the policeman's name? If we take his action, that is an action that came from a thought. That thought has got memories and emotions that came from thinking, feeling, and choosing. So if we're going to change anything, we have to do the work of being aware that that action was wrong. Number one, awareness. We then have to change the action of what is that thought? What was the thought behind there? What are the memories and the emotions within that? And then what kind of environment, societal structures, policies, belief systems, how people value others, what type of thinking, feeling, and choosing led to that. So we have to do that retracing. And then we have to start saying, okay, well, that kind of thinking, feeling, and choosing is wrong. That built this thought. So those memories, and we've got to dismantle. We've got to do the work of capturing, dismantling, and rebuilding and reconceptualizing that thought. And that is a process that we as humanity now have to do, with racism being a great example, because we are all very aware. We are all incredibly primed through COVID, primed to think differently. So the anxiety is this toxic thought is damaging to the brain and the body. We see from science that we are wired for love. We do not have wiring for this. So this goes counter to the design of the neurotransmitters and the circuits and the proteins. So this little tree, for example, is the proteins folded incorrectly. The vibrational component in the little supercomputer inside the protein of the branch is not working like it should. So, and this is creating a whole negative energy in the brain that's actually damaging to the brain and the body and increasing vulnerability. It's decreasing the immune system's ability to be able to fight disease. It's increasing cortisol levels, which affects the stress axis, the anxiety, the depression, the frustration, the anger, the stress, the toxic stress, because stress is good for us. All these things are these toxic thoughts that we have pushed down that are now being pushed up. So there are warning signals, because these are creating toxic energy in the physical brain that's increasing vulnerability. So the immune system of the brain is saying, hey, this is wrong. It treats this the same way it treats the virus. So if the COVID virus is in your body, your immune system's fighting it. If you've got a toxic thought in your body, in exactly the same way, your body is your immune system is fighting this, and you feel the fight through 3 different ways. Number 1, through things like anxiety, depression, frustration, irritation, anger, explosive, intrusive thoughts. All those emotions, they are telling you something's wrong, and you feel it physically in your body through increasing palpitations in your heart, your tongue being stuck to the roof of your mouth, tension in your body, maybe cardiac issues, heart issues, whatever. Gut issues. Your gut-brain connection is massive. So one of the first places that you will feel this kind of reaction is in gut bloating, various different gut issues, leaky gut syndrome. You can create you can destroy your gut bacteria just through toxic thinking. And you destroy gut bacteria, you're going to have major GI issues. And that's a sign. So we get physical and emotional warning signals that are popping up. And this is how God has designed us. And those are saying, hey, you're operating counter to love. You're operating counter to love. You're operating counter to love. It's also the ability, energy is never lost. Energy is always transferred. This creates a clump of energy, toxic in the brain. In the non-conscious mind, the thought is built in the brain and in the non-conscious mind. So we have a thought built in 3 places. When you think, feel, and choose, and you build a tree, it's not just a tree in your brain, it's there too. It's also in your spiritual part of you, which is the 99% part of you. So you have this quantum clump of energy, and this is toxic if it's like this. And it's also in the cells of your body. So your DNA is storing the memory too. And this is why we see, for example, in my most recent clinical trials, we saw that when people don't deal with their stuff, we see that the DNA is affected and you get cellular aging. And so your body can be older than your chronological age, which then sets you up for dementias. For pretty much a guarantee that you're on the pathway to dementia.
Whoa.
And we're seeing people getting dementias in their 50s now that 30 years ago we saw people getting in their 80s. It's now becoming commonplace for dementias. And I'm talking about dementias are not just one thing. Like Alzheimer's, for example, is not just one thing. It is it's a category of dementias. And it has multiple causes. And we're seeing one of the main causes of dementias, neurodegenerative brain diseases, which are very linked to autoimmune, which are very linked to things like cancers, etc., are predominantly lifestyle dominated. And lifestyle is how you eat, how you run your life, your exercise, how you're responding, how you manage your emotions, and all of that is governed by thought. So every lifestyle disease is governed by thought. So we can go, causes are lifestyle, food, diet, blah, 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 but all of that is governed by thought. So we have to address the thought. Yeah. And what got us to the thought. So therefore, anxiety, depression should be embraced because they are warning signals, to be celebrated because they are telling you something's wrong. Yay, I can fix if I know what's wrong. So that brings into awareness. Once I'm aware, what we see neuroscientifically is that these little branches, the minute I'm holding it up like this and you can see it, they are weakened. So all the little connections are weakened. They become vulnerable to change, malleable. But if they're in the if I push it down and I deny and I get angry and I'm not white privileged and I'm not this and all lives matter and God sees all the same blood and everything used wrong. I mean, the Galatians 5, I think it's 5:28, where it's God sees it looks the spirit of man, not Jew, Gentile, male, female, etc., etc. I'm just paraphrasing. That love, it goes out the door. When we suppress, when we get anger, people are in the process of passing opinions. Opinions are not what we should be passing at the moment. We should be getting facts. Don't say how you feel unless you've actually got the education. Don't go to Peter and ask Peter to educate you on racism because that's a burden that Peter doesn't need. We need to go and study. There's endless resources for us to educate ourselves and build up knowledge and do this work and then go alongside Peter and say, I walk alongside you in this fight to change this. I'm going to change my thinking. I'm going to influence other people's thinking in whatever capacity I can, and so on and so on. So in other words, in terms of racism, if you're feeling that you are needing to be defensive, that is a warning signal that you need to embrace. And if you deny the defensiveness, you're going to feel anxiety, I can guarantee. And that anxiety is actually your body telling you this is not operating in love. You need to listen. There's something wrong here with this way of thinking. And as uncomfortable it is, you need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable and start dealing with this stuff. And I can translate that into anything, to traumas that you've suffered, if it was a rape, an abuse, if it was a bad marriage, if it was a bullying at school, if you've just got a bad habit, all of it, as soon as you have this clump of toxic energy in the non-conscious mind, physically in the brain, you're going to get a prompt moving from your non-conscious mind to your subconscious mind. And you can get these little prompts. You're going to feel something's not right. And you just know, there's something on the tip of your tongue. We need to embrace that. We need to say, okay, what is this anxiety telling me? What is this depression telling me? If we suppress it, it will get worse. It'll just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you're going to think you go to a doctor and they're going to give you a label, and that's not going to help you because it doesn't fix anything. For 30 years, this process of saying you have an anxiety disorder, which is not even science, not even scientific, hasn't been proven, and saying that you need a medication to suppress, that is not working. It's caused worse problems. And it's clear in the Bible, we're told, bring all thoughts into captivity, not drop all thoughts. So we have to shift our mindsets, and we have to start doing the work of looking at the lesson behind the anxiety. Yeah. And that even if you increase your anxiety, in that process, that is okay, because what we see, as soon as I'm aware, oh my gosh, look what I've been thinking, that makes me feel terrible. Good. Now we channel that energy, even though you're freaking out in the love zone, because just by saying, acknowledging that was the wrong way of thinking, you've shifted from damaging toxicity to a healing toxicity where now you're starting to change. So yes, you still got to do the work of change, but the mere acknowledgement is already starting the process of healing in your brain and your body. And then you do the work over time. And then that comes to the whole timing thing. But Peter, have I answered your question there before I
Yes, brilliantly. That was amazing. And I just kept thinking about the person who finally does come to that revelation. Hey, I've been thinking these negative thoughts. How do we help them process? What are some steps or some direction you would give towards that person to help them free themselves from those thoughts that they've been thinking? You touched on it a little bit, but what are some clear steps?
So absolutely, and then that goes to Kevin, that goes to answering your question as well. So that's great. I kind of answered both, because you also asked how do you do it. So, there's very in my 38 years of research that I've been in this field of mind-brain research, I've looked at various different aspects, and when it comes to healing the mind and the brain, they're separate. So first of all, I'm going to tell you the steps, but first of all, you need to understand that the mind and the brain are separate. They're not the same thing. So your mind is how you think and feel and choose, and your mind is there for I like to say it's the spiritual part of you. A lot of quantum physicists will say that as well. So that's kind of the non-physical spiritual part of you, and it's the 99% of who you are. Okay, so listen to that. The mind, this God-given ability to think, feel, and choose, the spiritual power is 99% of who you are. Your brain is separate from that. So I've got a brain here. It's not a real one. Just FYI, it's not a real one, but it's a brain in a skull. Okay, so your brain, which is incredibly complex, which I've studied now for 38 years, and the changes in our understanding of the brain have changed so dramatically over the 38 years. That is only that plus your body is 1% of who you are. So that's the physical. So we can take your spirit, soul, 99%, and brain and body, physical. Now, it doesn't mean that because it's 1%, it's not important, because our brain and our body are how we express our spiritual nature. So we have to have the brain to be able to express our physical nature. As a man thinks, so is all that stuff. Okay, so we express ourselves through the brain and the body. So the brain and the body are reliant on the mind to drive it and to change it. And as you think, you influence your brain that influences your body. So when you're alive, you have this energy of thinking, feeling, and choosing that is affecting the blood and everything from every cell of your body, every function, your DNA, brain, everything. Okay, so that's the first thing. So mind is this very powerful energy that is the source is God, and you are given this energy, tremendous responsibility. What are you going to do with this ability to think, feel, and choose? Because whatever you do has consequence. You will build the physical trees in your brain. You will build the non-physical in the spiritual part of you, and you will build into every DNA of every cell's DNA of your body, and that passes through the generation. So we send through our thoughts to the next 4 generations, And by the fifth, it generally goes sterile, which is interesting, but that's how much damage we can actually do. But we send through as a proclivity. It doesn't mean that the next generation will do the same thing, but there's a huge chance that they will, because there's the nature, and then there's nurture. And nurture is dependent on society. What are the societal norms? What have you grown up believing? How were you brought up? What are your belief systems? What are the political, socioeconomic, all that stuff is the nurture. So nurture, nature, but then you've got I factor, which is my ability to think, feel, and choose. So I have a genetic component that comes through. I have a nurturing that may be terrible, but I have the I factor that can override biology and override nurturing. So I don't agree with apartheid. It's wrong. I grew up in a very racist environment, and that's come through from generations. And so therefore I had all the proclivity to continue a thought of racism, but I chose not to. I chose to see it was different. I chose to start rewiring my brain. I chose to immerse myself and to become aware. It doesn't make me better than someone else. It just happens to be the choices that I made, which I can translate that back into my work. I'm just using that as an example. So we can all do that. This is not something we can't do. So the brain and mind are inseparable but separate. Inseparable but separate. So when we talk about mind, we're not talking about brain. We're talking about something that makes the brain work, but they need to work together. Okay, so I studied the science of thought. So if our mind is working through our brain, how do these thoughts grow in the brain? Is there time? Is there a process? And do we influence it? That is called neuroplasticity. The brain is plastic. It keeps changing. And yes, we do control that process. And we control it on different levels. We have our conscious level, that's awake when you're awake. We have the subconscious level, which is that just aware level. And then we have our non-conscious level, which is that spiritual biggest part of us where all our memories and stuff are also stored, which I've been mentioning. So as we go through life, we are building all these, every experience from the time we open our eyes, we are updating and adding more and more. So no memory ever stays the same, and we're always building new stuff. So there's a process and there's a timing involved. So I'll take the most basic thing. Let's say that you are learning for an exam at school. This is the easiest way to understand this process. And I've got to now pass a biology exam, and you're learning all about the brain. I'll just take that. Okay. So you now have to study 6 chapters in a textbook, and you've got to write this exam. So how do you take that knowledge and translate that into structures in your brain that you can go and write an exam? And maybe you're a doctor and you need that in your practice of medicine. So there's going to be an application. So you don't want to just regurgitate information. You want to apply information. Okay, so what is that process? So I studied that initially, and it's a very complex process that your brain goes through, but I've narrowed it down to 5 basic steps. And the first thing is you have to get the information in. You have to become aware. We could take this to the example of how we as white people need to go and study all these incredible books and watch the videos and get ourselves up to date with what racism means and what white fragility is, etc., etc. We can use it. We've got to study that to a way that we can actually build that into us, so that we can have these as networks that are going to come out of us and we say the right thing and do the right thing. Okay, so we can take those 2 examples parallel. So we need to build our brain. So the first kind of thing, first part of healing people is brain building. There's also a lot about identity, but we can maybe talk about that at the end. But first thing is we need to build our brain. We see that when we learn correctly, and I'm going to tell you the 5 steps in a moment, we build resilience into the brain. We activate networks in the brain that enable us to have a different kind of energy flow in the brain. Part of the work that I do is looking at the nerve inside the brain too. We use advanced techniques like QEEGs, where we can see how the energy generated from the brain, from the different parts of the brain in response to your thinking, what's happening. And even though everyone has their own unique pattern and everyone needs to be compared to themselves, there's certain patterns we know that will create that if someone's very anxious, which will block clarity of thought, or if people are very, very, are being very violent, will block the ability to think clearly, etc., etc. And all of us can mess up our brainwaves, okay? Every time we make a toxic choice, we mess up our brainwaves. And there's different brainwaves, alpha, delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. You may have heard of some of these. Alpha's often spoken about, and each of them plays a different role. And I'm going to show you some images in a moment to help you understand. But let me first give you the 5 steps, and then we'll look at what it does in the brain. So essentially, what we want to do is our brain is hungry for knowledge. It's hungry for growth. It's designed that every day when you wake up, you've got new baby nerve cells that are there to scaffold, and we use those to grow new nerve cells. So you literally grow branches as you listen to me now in order for you to even process what I'm saying at speeds of 10 to the 27, which is faster than 400 billion actions per second. You are converting what you're hearing and seeing into little protein supercomputers in your brain. You built about 2,000 at this point.
I feel my brain growing right now.
It's growing. It is growing. You are great. I should hold this up because you're growing good stuff. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're growing lots of information into your brain and increasing your intelligence. So intelligence is something that continues to grow. This is really good for your brain. This kind of conversation, this kind of learning is activating genetic switches inside of your brain that increase your ability to think clearly, to be stronger, to deal with the traumas, to have the bravery and the courage to face the anxiety and look for what's under the anxiety, look for what's under the depression, to actually say, well, maybe I do have been a white fragile person. Maybe I am racist and I didn't even realize it. Or maybe I consciously don't want to be, but maybe I'm still driven by. Or maybe I don't know my biology like I thought it, whatever. Okay, whatever situation.
Yeah.
Can never reach complacency, because if we do, we die. We have to keep learning. We never know everything. We are designed to be constant learners. So taking all of that into effect, I did some of my first research helping people who had tremendous brain damage and then people with tremendous learning disabilities, and took these 5 steps and helped them to learn how to learn, take that biology, take that whatever, and we saw 35 to 75% improvement. So while I'm telling you the 5 steps, I'm just going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to show you a slide quickly that's going to help us understand this. Okay, so leading you into the 5 steps. Okay, so I'm just going to walk you through a few slides, and I promise you I will get to the 5 steps. This is just going to help you understand it. The first slide that you see, can you all see it?
Yes.
This is a brain, a real human who's alive, who's connected to very advanced brain technology. This is from another lab that does incredible work with brain imaging. And this person is basically thinking, feeling, and choosing in response to a set of instructions, and they're doing whatever. So this is what is happening now in your brain, and everyone watching now. As you are listening and receiving and hearing and seeing, this is energy that moves through your brain. Your brain is responding. The firing up is your thinking, feeling, choosing, your spirit moving through your physical brain, and your brain responding on an electrical, electrochemical level, a genetic level, electromagnetic level. So it's making neurotransmitters, it's making little proteins, it's doing all kinds of things in response to your thinking, feeling, and choosing. Okay, so it's actually doing and this is unique for every person. It will be different for every single person. It'll look different for each of us, but that firing, it's so exciting to look at this, because this is your brain responding to thinking, feeling, and choosing. This is your mind working through your brain, and it changes the structure of your brain. It's like a wave that builds on the beach, and as it crashes, that is you building this stuff into your brain. The crashing is a genetic change. You're causing genes to actually make thoughts. Okay, so that process is a 5-step process. Okay, so this is what you are doing. You drive this process. You drive that firing. And the result is a thought, and the thought then produces the action. So now the first thing let's take the learning for the biology, or learning about racism. You've got to be able to get it in your head. You've got to become aware. So if it's reading, if you're reading the biology, you actually read that information. And there's a very specific way that you read. I'm not going to go into all the details, but you should read a paragraph at a time. You don't read a whole chunk of information. You first get a big picture looking at your contents, whatever, and then you would read a section at a time, literally 3 or 4 sentences. And then you would focus on that. So you'd read that so you're aware of something. But it's reading, it's not just glancing through, it's really putting high attention and high focus. That activates what we call high beta in the brain. All the waves are flowing, but it activates bursts of high beta, which help you to focus and pay attention. So and if I translate that to what's happening at the moment, people are focused and they're paying attention to racism at the moment. They were focused and paying attention to COVID and to solutions. And we're now doing 2 things. We're working with 2 major problems in the world at the moment. And that's good, because when we all focus collectively, we'll find solutions. So then the next thing is you take that chunk of information and you would reflect on what you've read. So the next step is reflection, deep thinking, deep analysis. What does this mean? Ask, answer, discuss. Why? Finding the meaning behind it. So you're building your brain, you're learning, what does this mean? And you're asking yourself, and you're having this whole discussion. So reflection is a deep process of developing a level of understanding with just a chunk at a time. Then you would write, and there's different ways that you write. And I have a system that I've developed that's very brain friendly called Metacog. There's a lot of information on that. We'll show you some resources at the end. Fourth step is that you now check what you've written. Does it make sense? Have I actually understood this? Comparing it back to the original source. Is this clear? And then you would then express it, explain it, talk about it, do something with it. That is the brain building process. You would go through those 5 steps sequentially, up to as many times as you need to in an hour. So if you decide in an hour, I'm going to study 1 chapter, you may get through half the chapter in an hour, then you'll take a break and you'd carry on. So in other words, you build your brain in this 5-step process. Building your brain doesn't just mean you have to write an exam on it. Building your brain, that's what we should be doing now when we learn about racism. Not going to you, Peter, and asking you to educate us going to the books and the videos and the movies and Google and all the endless phenomenal resources, and sitting down and taking a paragraph at a time and reading it and asking, answering, discussing, writing down notes, checking those notes, and then talking, explaining maybe to yourself or whatever, and then take the next chunk of information and the next, and wiring this into our brain in a very deliberate, very intentional way. Now let's talk about the other part of using those 5 steps. The other part is to now detox the brain. So now we have to be aware. You can't study until you read the work. Otherwise, you've got to. So we had to start the brain building process by reading. We had to become aware of the knowledge in that paragraph. Same thing. I have to become aware. So the first step is awareness. Gather awareness of what is going on. So the big thought is currently COVID and racism. Those are the 2 big things occupying, not the only, but those are the 2 bleeding things at the moment that we're dealing with, the 2 bleeding bodies. So now we need to be aware. With awareness comes the malleability. From awareness, I go to reflection. So I need to start, okay, what is in this thought? What are these memories? What are these emotions? What's in here? Why is it there? And it's an ask, answer, discuss process. And it's, how did I get there in the first place? My thinking, feeling, and choosing behind it. Then I need to write down what I learn, because when you write down, your brain genetically wires it differently. When you don't write, you don't get quite the same process. So the writing down actually activates different things to happen in your brain that will enable you to learn more effectively. Then you need to look at what you've written. You put your brain on paper literally, and then you analyze. And it is such a revealing process. When it's done properly, you'll see, wow, I didn't actually realize I was thinking like that. So you've almost got to do it, reflect, you think deeply, you start writing. Just write down your thoughts. Very revealing process to what is actually going on. So if you're sorting out depression from a trauma, if you're sorting out depression from this racism or whatever, maybe anxiety around, am I racist, whatever it is, the writing is very important. Then you've got to check what you've written to try and see the pattern. What is going on? What am I thinking? Try and find some sort of, kind of put some order to it. And then you decide, okay, from that, how can I reconceptualize this? And I'm talking about doing this in a 7 to 15 minute block. The learning I spoke about in an hour block, I'm talking about this in a 7 to 15 minute block. So I'm talking about spending around about 1.5 minutes per each of the steps, or maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And so in other words, you're not going to solve it all today. You're going to find one little thing. You may think, oh, actually, yeah, I think maybe there is a bit of a racist thing. Maybe my parents did say something like that. And maybe one thought comes up and you see that on paper, you check that and say, okay, what could I do today? So the last step is an action. I can take that thought, I can reconceptualize it. I grew up seeing black and white bathrooms. How shocking. Maybe that's the thought I work on. So what can I say? Well, that's obviously not like that anymore, but what does that mean? So what does that mean for me? How can do I see black and white as different? So now I can actually, during the course, my active reach today could be, and you type it into your phone, the active reach, the reminders on your phone. You set it to come up 7 times, and because 7 times is very key in keeping it in your conscious mind today. And it just pops up on your screen and you read there, what does this mean that I actually grew up seeing black and white bathrooms? What did it do to my psyche? And then all I do is I read it. It's 10 seconds, and it just prompts me, I don't give an answer. Maybe I do, but maybe by the 7th time I look at it today, I start seeing something. Then tomorrow I pick up and I go to the next step. And so you go through a cycle, 7 to 15 minutes a day, where you actively work on detoxing your mindset. By the 21st day, you have basically started breaking down a toxic group of thoughts, a thought that you find has got so much to it that you may need more cycles, but you started breaking this down and you started building a healthy new thought. So you started building a new thought. This is getting less and less energy and you've got a new thought building. Now for the next 42 days, I need to turn this into a habit. It's not a habit yet. It's new. It's small. It's a baby. It needs watering. If I don't water this tiny plant, it's not going to grow. I need to give it energy. How? By thinking about it. So each day I spend a couple of minutes. I put the prompts in my phone and I think about what this new thought, this new reconceptualized process, and I move through that process over the next 42 days. By day 63, I have built a habit. Yeah. And then that tells me, that will give me the wisdom to say, okay, I've only dealt with one area. I've got to go back and now take the next area and go back. And at the end, so every 63 days, literally, you're working on another thought. And in that thought are a multiplicity of memories. So there's a lot. So out of this, what you thought was one thing, it might break up into 10 different things. So this is a lifestyle. And this is prayer. This is a lifestyle of worship. This is leading a life of love, because I am bringing a thought into captivity and I am renewing my mind. That's what I've just told you. That's what I've just described using science. I'm renewing my mind, and that is true prayer. True. Yes, we have our prayer where we pray over something or a situation, but that's just a little catalyst. Real prayer is living a lifestyle of continued renewal of your mind. And it's a different philosophy, because we've got so caught up in go to a church building, and I'm not being facetious and I'm not being critical, I'm being factual. We go to a church building and we pray there, or we pray for a situation, and I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying that that's not the only thing. That's such a tiny fraction of what it means to be human, what Jesus taught us it means to be human. So we've got to change that. Now, all of this, I'm going to show you some brain slides now. All of this stuff I've got in different books that, for people that have gone through it pretty quickly now, but I've got different books where you can actually learn how to do this. And this one tells you how to find your identity, because that's massive. In all my patients, all the people I've worked with, Peter, you can answer this as well. All of us, we've all got things that have attacked our value system. This is what my son-in-law said to me. When someone sees you as black, my one son, it really made me cry. He actually said this. I'll give this example. He said that he actually wanted to have plastic surgery to try and change him. Like Michael Jackson did. That's how he felt at one stage, by the way that people looked at him, because it was inferior. My one other friend, she's called Latanya, and you can hear their videos. I've actually got their podcast on mine. I really recommend that you get your congregation to listen to the podcast interviews I've done in this last week. They're powerful. They're very, very moving. But she was told, be more white. Take the la off your name. That was her using her identity. That's not God. That is to get a job, she must take the la off her name. I mean, this is unacceptable stuff. She couldn't move into an apartment behind a police station because her son might be walking to the shops to go and buy something, and the police might actually attack her son. We don't understand this, Kevin. This is what we as whites do not understand, because those wouldn't be considerations in our life. We don't have to have the talk. My daughter's married. My kids are married to they've got black husbands. They're going to have colored children. They're going to have the talk. Hopefully by the time I have grandkids, they won't have to have the talk. Yeah. So this is what we have to understand in terms of that. So what I've also got is I've developed all of this stuff I've put into an app. And this app, we've actually got it on special at the moment. It's really cheap, but this is my life's work in an app where I'm audio driven. I've tried to make it as easy as I can to help people to use these 5 steps daily. So it's audio driven on your phone. I mean, there's even audio guides for if you have a panic attack. It's organic and growing. We keep adding more stuff in. At the moment, we have the detox component in. The brain building component is in my book, Think, Learn, Succeed. So the first element, the first 5 steps for brain building is in this book. And then the 5 steps for detoxing is in this book, but the advanced version is in this book. Now, let me show you what happens in your brain, if I may. Do I have a few more minutes?
Yeah, you're just exploding my brain, doctor.
I wanted to show you.
Neuronal
Oopsie, I want to show you. Okay, first of all, it's fine. I'm going to do this one. Okay, so thank you. So I'm going to do this slide here first. The other slide takes too long to explain, and I just want to get to what it looks like inside the brain. This is a graph of research that I did in schools many years ago, and I wanted to see, and organizations, and I wanted to see what is our natural change that happens in humans, because we all want to change. So what I found, there's two things I want to show you here. If we are deliberate and intentional about changing and growing, and we just kind of just keep doing the same thing, look at the first two bar graphs. There's very little change in them. So what we see is it goes up, a little bit of change, and then it goes down, up and down. So the trend in organizations, whether it's schools, churches, family units, political systems, countries, is just going to be like this if we don't do something. We see this with racism. We have seen, yes, there's a bit of awareness. Yes, Martin Luther King. Yes, this, yes. And it keeps going back. We see a little shift and then it goes back. We see a little shift and then it goes. And so it's flatline. So here, all these years later, we're still sitting with this problem. We're still sitting with George Floyd being murdered by a policeman. This is because we haven't changed. So now what do? We have to be deliberate and intentional about how we are using our minds. So I show that as soon as you introduce these 5 steps that I've very briefly described, which obviously have very broad applications and a lot more than I've just explained in these 5 steps, very quickly. But when you think like that, when you direct your mind, when you do what I call mind management, okay, which is all the stuff I'm teaching, everything I've told you, bring thoughts into captivity, renewing, this is mind management. You will improve your intellectual, cognitive, social, and emotional functioning. You will change in a way that will change you and society by 35 to 75%. That's that third bar graph. That's the change that we're needing now. We don't need another little blip. We
Agreed.
need a change like this when it comes to racism.
Yeah.
We need a change like this in how we run our societies. And that is going to come from the individual within the organization. Changing the individual starts with the individual, and then the individual spreading out today, Sumeria, and all the world, that concept. So it starts with the individual. And that's where that we're going to be setting up a series of challenges, and maybe your church would like to join us, where we want to teach people to go on literally be putting the concept together, but a 90-day challenge where people get on the app and we start changing our mindsets, and we start seeing in 90, because it takes 63 days. So we want to do a sort of 63-day challenge collectively across the board and get people to start changing mindsets. Because if we can change mindsets in 63 days, we can see a change in thinking that will produce ideas and creativity for changing the social structures and the policies. It'll translate to the bigger things. But we've got to get our minds right first and into that mode, that creative mode, which is the shift you see there. Let's have a look at the next slide over here. This is, these are called head maps. This is from the technology that I use in my most recent clinical trials. To orientate yourself, the little thing that you see at the end, that's the nose. So think of it looking down. You've got 2 ears and you've got a nose. Okay, Does it orientate you?
Yep.
Okay, so here you see the timing, day 1, day 21, day 63. It takes 21 days to create the neuroplastic effect in the brain where learning takes place, where you actually build a memory that is now ready to be turned into something that will create change. Then it takes another 42 days. That's why it goes from 22 to 63. And at day 63, we now have habit formation. So habit formation doesn't occur at day 21. It occurs at 63. You've got to get to the 63-day mark to build a change that actually makes a change, to get that shift on the graph. So we have to go through cycles of 63 days to create the changes, and it's an ongoing process. So this particular subject was in the experimental group. I do random controlled, gold standard, double blind, blah, blah, all that fancy stuff. So this is a subject in the experimental group, which means that they got the treatment, and the treatment was the app. So I didn't work with them directly. They work with themselves using app technology. So these 5 steps in this, so it was this exact app that they used. And this has had 38 years of research behind it. And so this is the most updated, clinically trialed version, scientific. So I'm not giving you wara stuff. I'm giving you science, hardcore science that has been shown clinically to make these changes based on hardcore science. So this particular subject came in totally broken, totally depressed, not sleeping, relationships offline, work not coping, just a flat line, totally unhappy, tried everything to fight this depression, etc., and really not coping, came into the study because they were seeing that they were desperate for help.
Mm-hmm.
The blue that you see there shows an energy level that's offline. We see different energies there: delta, theta, alpha, beta. I haven't got gamma in, that's another one. And that is like waves in the sea. So just to understand energy, your brain generates energy, your body generates energy, you're alive, you generate energy, you're made of energy, you generate energy. Yeah. Einstein's work, okay? And it's spiritual. The Job 32:8, God breathed the breath of life into us, okay? So the breath of life is energy, it's quantum physics, it's what ticks, and we can measure that with delta, theta, alpha, beta. Okay, so it's measuring the energy of the brain. And the energy of the brain moves over the different structures of the brain. So it tells us different stories and different things about how you're thinking. So for example, if we see a lot of dark blue in the front of the brain, which you can see in the middle and the front of the brain, which you see at day one in the subject, this tells us someone who's got very low self-awareness, feeling very out of control, dominated by toxic thinking, in tremendous toxic stress, very poor well-being. Okay, so there's a really unempowered person functioning there. And a lot of people feel like that at the moment. Now, watch this person. Put her on the app. By day 21, can you see the blue's gone, and we now have what we call a gray brain. And we compare this to a database. Now, the research shows that no one has a normal brain. So we're not trying to say that's a normal brain. What we're doing is comparing it to averages of other people that have got a level of mind management in their brain. And when the energy is flowing like it should, we get that kind of pattern in the brain. So it means if you look at the little thing down the bottom, you'll see it says Z scores and you'll see colors. So what we are seeing is that when people hover kind of around the 0, which is gray, and the 2 greens on either side, -1 and 1, that is in that range of where people seem to be thinking with insight, thinking with clarity, communicating well, operating in love. Okay, so what that looks like in a wave, think of the sea. If you far out to sea, you get these massive deep swells, beautiful big swells. That would be delta. Okay, then you come in a little bit more in your boat and you still got swells, but they're not quite as big. That's theta. Then you get closer to the beach and they're getting smaller and smaller all the time, the waves, and starting to move into like an actual wave, but the swells are getting smaller. That's alpha. So there seems to be a connecting point between the deep sea and then the actual wave on the beach. We call that alpha. Then there's the wave that crests and breaks. That's beta. Okay, as it's building, we call it low beta, and then as it reaches the peak and drops, that's high beta. And then the ripples on the beach as the water runs up, that is gamma. And then it goes back and it cycles again. So as we go through the day and the night, these waves are moving. And as we're thinking, we activate these waves to move differently. And what we see when people are very deliberate and intentional about capturing thoughts, renewing the mind, learning, building all this mind management stuff, these 5 steps, etc., we see these waves flowing like they should. So the gray is showing us that we're starting to get a good wave pattern. It doesn't mean that this woman's never going to be depressed again, because depression is a good thing. It teaches us stuff. Okay, as I've been saying, depression is a lesson. Okay, anxiety is a signal. It's telling us it's not an it. You can't have clinical depressions. That's a misnomer. It's wrong information we've been sold. It's a lie. Yeah. What we have is depression is very real. It's 99%. It can crush you. So we have to dive into it. We have to read it. We have to get in the garden like Jesus did and face the pain. Yeah. Get it on the cross and we'll rise again. That's what we're seeing happening here. We have to embrace the anxiety. We have to get into racism. We have to get in the garden of racism at the moment. We have to face the racism. We have to get it on the cross, and we have to reconceptualize and rise again. And with the wounds in our hands of what racism did to us. Yeah. That's what we're doing here. So this woman at day 21, depression lifted. She's sleeping. She still has bouts of depression, but the difference now is I know why I was depressed. Yeah. I have the understanding of the thoughts that caused the depression. I'm starting to see the thinking, feeling, and choosing that led to the depression. I have mind management. So in her narrative, because we looked at a lot of different psychological measures and we looked at their story. Everyone has a story. We can't put people in a box. Everyone's got their own experience. So we looked at their story, and at her narrative at day 21 was, I still feel bouts of depression. I'm still having some sleep issues. but I feel like I can control this now. I'm starting to see why. I'm starting to, by day 63, as she carried on using the technique in the app, we see it even better. We see a tremendous sustained improvement. 6 months, I'd say at the 6-month point of the study, even better, even more improvement. So we see a sustainable change, but it doesn't mean that she just stopped. This is now a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle of her learning to manage her mind. And that's what I teach. That is prayer. It's a lifestyle of mind management. We saw things, for example, like if you, this at that level where day 1, if you look in her DNA, if you look at her cell health, she had a biological age, nearly 25 to 30, I think it was 25 years older than her chronological age. So her body was 25 years older.
Wow.
Her cellular health, that is a pattern that pretty much will guarantee dementias of some sort. She's in a neurodegenerative pathway. Her body is aging fast. She's vulnerable to the cancers, to the autoimmune disorder. Who knows it, wherever her genetic weaknesses is. This is an issue that we need, but now she's changed that. Through mind management, she's changed her vulnerability, she's changed how she's functioning, she's changed, and this is what we can all do. So in terms of racism, in terms of the trauma of COVID, embrace COVID as a chance for us to explore and forget our brain right so that we can get creative to try and find ways to help those who don't have enough money, that don't have jobs. If you're in a position where you can help others, create finances, help them, or if you're in a position that you, whatever, we can think differently. We have to think differently. We have to go back to ground zero. We need a jubilee, literally.
We do. We need a brain jubilee.
We're all at different levels and we can help each other. We see in terms of racism, we can do the same thing. We can't just have this happening like that graph I showed you. We need this kind of radical change in our mindsets. If people just keep staying around day 1, let me show you someone who doesn't change. Let me show you, this is now a control subject. This subject got all the psychological measures, all the brain measures, and all the blood measures, and all the DNA measures. And this particular subject had a biological age, I think it was 30 years older than chronological age. And this particular subject was made very aware because all the psychological tools and narrative made her aware of what was going on in her life. But we didn't give her any mind management. She didn't get the app. So as she went through all the different measurements, and there was lots of testing that was done, which made the testing was asking questions that made you think, and start making you look inside your unconscious mind. Long story short, without mind management, she got worse and worse. So where you see the red, you see right on day 63, where you see red at high beta, that is someone who is so anxious that the blue brain is low energy, and the red brain is high. So now we have a tsunami. The red brain's a tsunami, where the blue brain is like stagnant water that is thick and not moving and filled with, two visuals just to help you understand. Both set you up for the dementias because both are abnormal patterns. And every time we are toxic, we're throwing ourselves into these combinations of patterns, but we can change it. As we manage our mind, we can change it. So this control subject, just to make you at ease, did get the app once the study was over. So we gave them mind management after the study, and it made a radical change. We see things in this particular subject. If you have a look at the just like the little red blobs throughout, all of those red blobs are showing that this person's got stuck. So they're aware that there's an issue, but they can't deal with it, so they're shoving it down. So if you look at day 1, 21, and 63, and you look at delta, we see lots of activity going on there. We see that it's yellow and bright green, which means that it is a lot of suppressed memories, which means that this person is not getting good sleep. This person during the day, delta should drop during the day. Delta has got a lot to do with sleep, dreamless sleep, which we need to help us get growth hormones and enzymes to help us function and to help our cells function. So it has to get to a gray level when we sleep. And so if you are in a gray level, if you are in a green or a yellow or a red level when you're sleeping or when you're awake, that means that you're just not getting enough rest. So we saw during the day that her delta, which should have dropped, should have gone down to more of a blue level, was way too active. In fact, it like went off the scales, which shows that the brain is like, doesn't know what to do. There's all the suppressed, and that's why you get the red at that side. So this is someone who's saying, I don't know what to do. I know there's something wrong. I know what to do. And then shove it down. And then like going through life and just getting worse and worse and worse. And we can change that. This is what we showed with the research. So that's a lot of stuff that I've said. There's a lot more I can say, but I won't say anymore because there's a lot. Maybe you'd like to ask me some questions.
I was, hearing you say that just reminds me of what blew me away. And that's that we can create grooves in our brain, unhealthy or healthy.
Yes.
And when I think about the current climate, I'm going to ask you a question, doctor, and ask if you can answer it in about 1 to 2 minutes. Knowing how you were raised in the racism that you saw, what would you say to a person, specifically a white person, who doesn't even realize they're racist, but they are? It's in there. It's in them. What would you tell them?
I would tell them to open their mind, because they believe in God's love, and God tells us to accept, and to sometimes we have to challenge ourselves. And love is the desire. If there's love is the awareness that something is wrong. Recognize that there is something going. You may not agree with it, but there is something going on in our society at the moment. So open your mind enough. That's what love is, and start doing some research. Do some reading. There's a great book and a great TED talk by, I'm trying to think of the lady's name. She wrote White Fragility. It's a fantastic, I can send you the link. And it would be a great TED talk to listen to, where it helps people as white people who are in the position you've just described, to just start looking in a non-threatening way at maybe I should open my mind enough to understand the concept. I would start there. It's a great TED talk. It's not threatening. It will help to just start the process. And then I would also do what we are called to do, and that is get wisdom, get understanding. And how do you do that? So get more knowledge, get some books, read some stuff, keep your mind open. Don't go in, this is a lot of nonsense. If you do that, you're increasing toxicity, you're damaging yourself, and you're damaging the world. You're being part of the problem. And I know it's not nice to hear this, but you need to get knowledge. The knowledge then will tell you, maybe I have thought like that. So as you study and gain knowledge, read these books, listen to these videos, but go in with an attitude of, I'm trying to learn. You don't have to accept everything, but there's something in there that is going to help you understand what's going on at the moment. That's what I would challenge people to do. And in doing that, you're also going to increase your own intelligence, because you're gaining knowledge, which is really important. Once you have facts, generally when people have the facts, when you show them that these are the statistics, I've got some great blogs that people have written on my and podcasts. They could listen to those as well, because they're very non-threatening. That'll also open their mind to starting to process all of this. But when you start seeing statistics of how many Black people have been killed by police versus white, actual scientific studies, then you have to question, okay, there's something wrong here. If that percentage more, maybe I need to that helps. With factual information, you can start changing. But it's going in with a loving and open mind to see, maybe I was wrong. Because it's very healthy to look at yourself. You don't know everything. No one knows everything. The best scientist is a scientist who can say, I did that wrong. And there was stuff I've done wrong in the past. That's the only way I've progressed in my science, is because I've been able to say, that didn't work. I thought it did, but it didn't. This is what I've got to do to change it. Yeah. And that's what the Proverbs are calling us to do. Get wisdom, get understanding. How do you do it? You've got to get the information. Yep. You've got to try and understand it. And that requires an open, loving mind.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you. Peter?
I would just ask in my last question, how, sometimes when we think about our children and how we're to lead them in the next season, that actually helps us deal with where we're currently at in the current season. So what would be your advice to us as we say, how do we lead our children away from racism? How do we help them shape their perspective and their minds so that they don't have to maybe wrestle with some of the things that we've wrestled with, and we can present the correct information to them at an earlier age so that they can process correctly? What would you say?
I would say set up racism school. So in other words, teach our kids in Bible, when the kids are in Sunday school, whatever system, Bible studies, I would turn this whole year into an educational process in your church, where from the littlies to the big ones to in church, it doesn't mean that you can't teach other stuff, obviously, but have we in a time now where we have to change this. We can't keep doing this. We have to do this, which means deliberate and intentional teaching, making them aware from young. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, one of my friends, Latanya, and you can listen to her podcast. She's got young kids, and there was the riot happening in the protest happening outside their house the other night, and the police were being terribly violent, unnecessarily so. And her daughter was very frightened, and her first reaction was, "I'm going to protect. I'm going to take her away from here." And then she said, "No." She was young. She was 7, I think she's 7. They were safe where they were in the building, but she said, "Look, this is the ugliness of it. This is what's happening. It is scary." But she explained it, and instead of the child knowing something's going on but not having understanding, which would increase fear, she still was scared, but she had understanding, so changed the fear into a learning experience, and she could. Now, that was a really difficult decision, because as a parent, you want to protect, but we can't. We've got to look at things like, as well, Paul was a black man. Jesus was a person of color. Let's see the textbooks. Jesus is God, all these white people. We've got to stop that. Take that out of the equation. Teach people Paul was a black man. Jesus was a person of color. Stop this God is white stuff, and we've got to change those kind of things. So it's educating. We need to educate. Like we teach little bits at a time, kids can handle so much. We have underestimated what our children can handle. And if we don't equip them, we won't change the next generation. And that's the white kids and the black kids, people of color, all of it, indigenous. What we've done in this country to the American Indians is also something that we have to address. As we start getting Black Lives Matter at that level on the graph, then we can start addressing the other things that come along with racism. So.
Thank you so much. You are brilliant. And this has been a joy. We're so thankful for you. And you are unmatched, unparalleled in your field. And so we're so thankful that you would join us on this podcast. By the way, you said Zimbabwe. I have family still in Zimbabwe. So the whole time in my mind, I was like, maybe I should take her back and say, "My sister, thank you for coming on this podcast."
I'm born in Zimbabwe. So that's so cool. Wonderful. That's wonderful. I've loved being with you both, and thank you for your incredible openness and insightfulness, and thank you for letting me be so transparent and open and direct. So thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.